Welcome to Armchair Preaching, a podcast of the First Presbyterian Church in Lakeland, Florida. This is a podcast about God's Word, the beauty of the gospel, and what it takes to communicate that truth to others. I'm your host, Pastor Zach McGowan, and on today's episode, Pastor John and I discuss the impact of the disQUIET series, and we discuss this week's messages in our services. We hope you enjoy the conversation. Welcome back, everybody, to Armchair Preaching. Today, with Pastor John in a virtual space. John, should we tell people how long it took us to get this recording?
Yes, we should tell them. It's been quite an effort. We've learned a lot.
You know, and we were saying right before, we thought that the one advantage to COVID was that we got to learn how to do all these things really efficiently, and then I just blew that hole out of the water. We did not do this efficiently at all, but here we are, and prayerfully, this is going to record nicely and be able to be edited nicely and be good for folks at home and as they're participating themselves in a virtual space, because they're not with us either. They're watching this online or listening to this on their phones. So technology, right? That's
well, we and the one technology that we did use primarily when we did these recordings in the past did not work today. We had to learn a new platform and make a new platform work, which meant we had to do some upgrades. So it's been quite an endeavor, but we're here.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's appropriate as we're doing a series on stress and anxiety.
Right. Yeah, we got to practice that for a few minutes.
Yeah. So I should say I'm off site. I'm at a hotel just outside of Miami. I'm having a day with my son yesterday, or evening with my son yesterday. We went to a concert and finishing up the morning. He's getting some schoolwork done. I'm getting some work done here, but we're doing this because we've got folks that are relying on this for their small groups on Wednesday, and people who are relying on it for their groups on Sundays, and so we want to make sure we get this done. So I appreciate you taking that time, John.
Well, thanks for championing the technology too.
Yeah. So we have been in this series called disQUIET for now. We've done 3 sermons. We're just past the halfway mark. 4 sermons now. We're just past the halfway mark. We just passed week 4. We just want to talk with you a little bit about what you have heard from people. And I know we've been in conversations with a lot of different groups of people about the importance of this series and people's own anxieties and stresses. And, you know, what have you been hearing from people about what they're primarily, you know, what triggers their anxiety, what triggers their depression, what triggers their stress more often than not? Have you've been hearing from people throughout the series?
Yeah, well, first off, people are saying that they are appreciative about how practical this series is that it is certainly biblical. We're looking at biblical characters, and we are looking at their lives, and we're seeing in their lives that they were going through the same kinds of things that many of us go through regularly in our lives. And out of that, we were able to learn from them and to see in them not just what they did, but what God does with them. So a number of people have commented on how practical it is. And yeah, the people have come up and talked about the importance of the series, either explicitly or because I know them and I know what they've been going through, sort of implicitly said, it has been helpful for me going through what I'm going through. And the kind of things that they're going through, I think are the kinds of things I think we both have referenced them at some point in the last 4 weeks. But the one thing that maybe we haven't emphasized as much in terms of anxiety, and really hasn't come up in conversations, but I know just from looking at any number of reports that are out there, they are real. These are things that people are dealing with. It's just the financial anxiety. There's a lot of anxiety around the cost of living and the cost of groceries and gas and the basic things of life. And so I know that that's a real thing. I know just from looking around, listening to family and friends, and just looking around the rest of the world, that's an issue. But these other things are issues as well. These are all real things. People are dealing with family issues. where they are stressed. They find stress about parenting is hard. Being in marriage, living with another person is hard. Living around other people is hard, and just being human and together is messy and is hard and has its own source of anxiety. And I think it's been I think it's been, if anything's been the refrain of what's been most useful about this, just dealing with difficulties in human relationships and how we might sort of push through those.
Yeah, yeah.
How about
I
you?
think, yeah, one of the words that keeps coming up as I've talked to folks about what they're dealing with is the word balance. People they're just feeling off balance,
Mm,
whether it's work, like you said, whether it's work, family balance, whether it's, financially, they don't feel like they can get ahead, and that's throwing them off. That's keeping them out of balance. Whether it's, even in themselves, trying to get the balance in their own emotions. I think that's the word that I have heard from folks, is just a lack of balance. And one of the things I feel like we have emphasized in the series is and we haven't said it like this, and maybe this is some language that'll come up in the next couple of weeks, is without the center point. If your center point is off on a lever, you're not going to have balance. If your center point is off on a scale, you're not going to have balance. And what this series is trying to do is to create that center point in Jesus Christ. If that's strong, then everything else is going to be in balance. If that's wide and that's established in your life, that's going to create better ways to have balance. And I think that's what this has been about. And it's not that we don't believe people should go, get the therapeutic help if they need to, or the medical help if they need to. You emphasized that a couple of weeks ago in your message. I mentioned that at the beginning of our message, but that we believe that even if those things are to be most effective, if the therapeutic is going to be most effective, if the medical intervention is going to be most effective, it's going to be most effective when it is founded on a faith-based relationship with Jesus Christ. And I sense people are gravitating to that, in this, and
I think they're looking for something. They're looking for that. They're looking for that grounding. It reminds me of a story by Max Lucado. He tells about a storm that's just coming in, and somebody had a ship, and they were just trying to tie that ship down to the dock, with all these, line after line after line, tie it down. And an old sailor came up and said, "Here's what you need to do. So when you got a storm coming in like that, you go out into the open water and anchor deep."
Mm-hmm.
And that's what you were just describing. I think that's what the series has been giving. He said, is that when you anchor deep into something that's not you. It's something that is beyond you, and it's deep. But it's the thing that'll hold you in place when the storms are blowing all around. And I do think that's, and I'd be curious, because you asked you sent a note ahead of time about this opening question, and so I was looking around at even what's happening in society, and I've heard Paul Sewich talked about this pretty regularly. So I went and looked and found some statistics on this. Is that American Psychological Association last year said that pre and post pandemic stress levels. So pre and post pandemic, think of in terms of anxiety. 18 to 34-year-olds, pre pandemic, 26% of them talked about having stress. Post pandemic, so this is now still, and I think it's not gotten any better. If anything, in an election year, and it gets worse, at 35%. So from 26% to 34%. 35 to 44-year-olds, 21% pre-pandemic, 31%, 10% jump in anxiety levels. 45 to 64-year-olds, 18% to 22%, and the only ones sort of came out okay were the 65 plus, and that's not all, not all of, because there's still 10% pre-pandemic and 9% post-pandemic. So the reality is that we live in a world that is seeing increases, and I think that's part of the importance of and helpfulness of this series. We're seeing increases in the levels of stress in the society, and I wonder if you could what your thoughts are on why do you think that
Yeah.
what do you attribute the post-pandemic stress level increases?
Well, I think one of the things that we've mentioned in previous series, and I think it's come up a bit in this series towards the beginning, is that we have become a more isolated society, and the pandemic made that worse. Now, that was already on the increase even before the pandemic. It's the cliche, it's the early 21st century cliche. We're more connected than ever before, but lonelier than ever before. I mean,
Yeah.
that was happening before the pandemic. If that was happening here, increase, the pandemic went like now it literally told us
Yeah.
don't even look at each other's faces, right?
Yeah.
And
These started it.
yeah.
These started it, and then the pandemic just blew it out of the water.
Well, and I mean, it told we the nonverbal communication was that every single person that you are interacting with has the potential to kill you just by breathing on you.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you this. You mentioned one of the things that is not showing up in statistics because they haven't, because it's hard to test this, but we're seeing it even in our children's ministry, is kids who were, pandemic kids. And I thought pandemic kids, I don't mean pandemic babies. I mean kids that were in early elementary school in the pandemic. Think kindergarten, first, second grade. They were there 2020, 2021. We're seeing a massive increase in the arrested social development of those kids. We're seeing it. I mean, I don't have if I was a social psychologist and not a pastor, this would be what I would be studying right now, is the relative social abilities of kids who are now fourth and fifth graders, as so those are the kids that were in kindergarten, first grade. Well, and I asked a parent, because she was talking to me about some of the challenges her son was facing, and I said, "What do you think this is?" And she straight up, she looked, no hesitation. She said, "It's a pandemic." She said that.
Wow.
She said those kids are the you can't generation. You can't. You can't take your mask down. You can't hug your friend.
Wow.
You can't. I mean, so, and now they're told you can, but they don't know how, right? So they lost some of that. So you're seeing, and then so what does that do? So that creates an additional stress on parents when, as I know, being a parent in general in normal time is stressful.
It's stressful. Yeah.
So now throw on top of it this developmental delay that every kid in that generation has experienced. We're not talking about developmental delays that are the result of some sort of genetic issue or some sort of a special need that's of that nature. We're talking about a societally learned delay. And that's in addition to that. So that's social delays. That's in addition to all of the academic things that they lost during that time. So then parents are dealing with that. Well, it's a trickle down effect. The other kids that were older and maybe navigated that world, but they have siblings who are not navigating that. So you've got this ripple effect of social anxiety that was already happening before the pandemic because we're this increase in loneliness, and that's really, it's really why I started the way I started on Sunday, was this idea of loneliness as a cycle of depression, because I just see that as, I don't say the biggest issue related to anxiety and stress, but I do think it's, to your point, it's one of the biggest contributing factors, I think, to the anxiety and stress, and why I feel like our church right now is seeing such incredible growth. I don't want us to pat ourselves on the back because it's not us, it's the Lord. But people are gravitating towards FPC right now because what are we emphasizing? What have we been emphasizing over the last 18 months? Connection and community. And we're creating more opportunities for that, and people are hungry for it. And people And so now we're navigating the opportunities of, okay, how do we account for this wave of people? It's a great wave of people who are saying, no, we want to be a part of a place that is emphasizing community, and it's exciting. But I think it speaks into what, God answering the problem of loneliness in our society through the church, and I think that's why all of this is, providential in God's economy.
I do think this is an important series to deal with that loneliness, and I don't know if this is the societal things they don't seem primed to shift anytime soon. They're still going to be with us. The technology is still going to be have the ability to make us closer than we've ever been before and further away from each other than we've ever been before. That doesn't shift. We then adapt to that, nor do the things that come out of the out of this heightened anxiety. I know one of the studies said that there was a 20-something% increase in the number of adults who are experiencing forgetfulness and their inability to concentrate on things. And I hear that these are I'm talking about things you hear. I hear the people saying, "Man, I don't know what I feel like I've got early Alzheimer's or something like that." It's like,
Yeah.
dude, you're 35 years old. You can't. That can't be it.
Well,
Concentrating, making decisions, all of those things like that
makes me feel a ton better, because I do. I mean, I'm 44, but I there are times when I go in and I'm like, what was I doing? Or you get really you get really distracted. You start one project and then you get an interruption.
These
and
are the signs of the times that we're living in right now. I think these are all connected, and I really like your image of the of being. And I know this is what we've been saying in our own ways throughout this series, is that really when you find that grounding, Max Lucado's, if you anchor deep, if you find that sort of grounding in Christ, some of the other things don't go away, but our ability to cope with those things and to deal with those things is rooted in something that is bigger than anything that we're seeing all around us. This is not the first time in human history that we've had crises in a culture, or that people have been stressed out about a higher level of stress. Maybe it's the first time we know more about it, but it's not the first time that's been true. And what has also been true throughout history is that people who have faith, they latch onto something greater than any of these problems, and to the extent that we can communicate that, I think that'll continue to be a tremendously useful thing. I mean, it is for me. I mean, see, I'm no different. Like you said, I'm no different than seeing the people lose their minds over tonight was the vice president debate, between the vice presidential candidates debating. That people have just lost their minds over politics and over all kinds of things, and that is a source of anxiety, at least at some level. And I too am looking for something that is greater. So you and I get to speak about it, and we also get to live it. We also get to embrace it ourselves.
Yep. Well, we're going to take a short break, and then when we get back, we're going to be jumping into this week's message on Peter. Great
Love
subject.
The guy.
Great subject this week. So we'll take a short break, and we'll come back in just a few moments. And we are back. Pastor John, there's a great opening conversation, and I think it dovetails really into this week really nicely, because we both of us kind of touched on the previous weeks, just kind of little bit, but what we see in Elijah and Moses and David and now this week Peter is that desire to get back to the foundation of their relationship with the Lord. And Peter's situation is incredible. And I love, it was Last week I talked about the fact that sometimes our messages are more complementary than identical. This week
Yeah.
they were far more identical than
Yes. 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 I know.
the emphasis on.
We both walked through the story. We had a different introduction, but we both
Yeah.
walked through the story carefully, and where we landed with the stories and what we said about them was very, very similar.
Yeah, the emphasis on how failure can breed that sense of anxiety or depression or whatnot, and then the points at the end, you added that the failure is not the enemy part, which I thought was a really helpful way to comfort people. But then, we can find comfort in Jesus, and God meets us in the dark moments is almost the same point. And then the purpose, obviously, that's
Both
where
landed there.
we both landed there. But I want to talk about we both, I mean, we hit even some of the same exact notes of Peter's life, right? Or Peter's ministry life, right? And so we talked about his background as a fisherman.
And everybody listening should be reminded that rarely do we talk to each other ahead of time.
Yep.
We have an outline that we follow that has been published to everybody, so we're all on the same page. All the music leaders and worship leaders and tech people, they all on the same page. But and it has a description of the text and the message of the day. But you and I don't sit down and talk. There are churches out there where pastors sit down and once a week and they go over the text together.
Yeah.
Yep.
But we have the little description of the week, and we pray that we just pray God leads us where He wants us to go, because again we've got two separate, different sides of our congregation, and they have different varying needs. But this week we hit some of the exact same notes of Peter's life, and I wonder, what was your thought about the points, the places in Peter's life that you wanted to emphasize to build? I think we were both trying to paint a picture of who Peter was, right?
Yes.
We're painting that picture. We used some of the same words: passion, I think braggadocious,
vocal,
vocal.
Yeah.
I mean, we used a lot of the same words. So what was it in your mind, hitting the notes that you wanted to hit, the walking on water, the great declaration of faith, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God, and then the get behind me, Satan. We hit some of the exact. I don't think we added anything from you. Was there one that you did that I didn't do? I didn't notice one.
Well, you did washing the feet.
I did washing the feet.
You gave Peter a little more personality. You had his mother-in-law and his wife in there. You had him washing his feet, being comforted later on. The way you talked about that, but those were, I mean, out of all the collection. If we did a dozen descriptions of Peter, we had 9 of them were the same.
Yeah.
Even where we went, and we didn't talk about that. We just went to the same 9 because, you're right. Because it was important to me that if we're going to paint Peter accurately, we need to paint his tremendous failure. In fact, most of the things. In fact, I said this. I built up those to get to the failure, because the failure is pretty significant. That is, I mean, this is Jesus. This is Peter who walked with Jesus for 3 years, and then the minute it gets tough, the minute he potentially has facing risk of his own life, he's out.
Yeah.
And as you said, and this is another one, as you said, he wasn't even there when the women were there. He wasn't there. He was gone at the crucifixion itself.
Well, and I thought about this. I did a little, kind of like a thought experiment, and this didn't end up in the message at all, but it's so much more powerful that it's Peter, because of the 11 disciples, obviously Judas is the betrayer. Of the 11 disciples, you have John, who is at the foot of the cross.
Yeah.
So you have 10 others. None of those 10 are with Jesus at the foot. All of them in some way denied Jesus. And I'm sure, and this is an imaginative sort. This is like if I'm writing a script for The Chosen, this is what you're going to see. You're going to see all of the other disciples also denying Jesus, people asking them, but it
Mm-hmm.
but it doesn't hit quite as hard in the gospel if what's recorded is Thomas's denial or Thaddeus's denial, or James the Lesser's denial. Those are all,
Yeah, yeah.
even James or Andrew, they all denied him in some way, but it hits really, really hard because it's Peter. And it's not,
Well, you mentioned the passage. You mentioned the John 6, Jesus saying, "Are you going to leave me too?"
yeah,
And Peter's the one say, "Lord, where would we go?" This actually kind of funny if you think about it. He says, "Where are we going to go? You have the words of victory." Comes down to the wire. I'm going to go somewhere. I'm
you're
not.
going to
I'm
go
not. I'm
someplace
not
else.
here. I'm
Yeah,
leaving. So
yeah,
he doesn't. The very thing that he was bold about saying in John chapter 6. By the time you get to
the end.
the
Yeah,
crucifixion, he's done. He's
yeah,
gone.
yeah. And it's one of those,
So it
again,
is. It is a very stark contrast. It's the stark contrast that stands out.
yeah. And I think the other side of it too is how Jesus is wanting to set Peter up for the purpose, which is where we both landed, because the purpose of Peter was ultimately to be the next great shepherd of the church. He got Jesus is having to get him to that place where he uses all the passion, he uses all the confidence, but it's tempered with trust, reliance, and humility. And that only it's why I think it was so great that your first point is that failure is not the enemy, that God is actually going to work through the failure. Um, that's to me, I think, what stands out about that particular thing is that the fail. Obviously, God is not the author of sin, and God does not want that we should sin and fail.
Okay. You
But
can't attribute evil to God. Yeah.
yeah, but He knows we're going to, and so He's going to use that to His ultimate glory. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I want to spend a little time talking about the John 21 because, again, you and I both did the exact same thing. We just mentioned there's a ton we could talk about here, right?
But the main point
But
is
the main point is,
he was restored. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, he was restored.
Yeah.
And we both emphasized the threefold restoration. Um,
Right.
I mean, was there any part of you that wanted to dig in this sermon with the two types of love language, the love that are in there, the different words
Yeah.
for know, that to know, what,
Yeah.
all the different things that we mentioned. Was there any part of you that said, maybe this is important for this week, but ultimately decided against it?
I did decide against it. When I was taking Greek in seminary and I came and we had to translate this passage, I thought I thought I had discovered a secret that nobody had ever discovered before. It's like, did everybody notice this? There's two different words for here. This one's like agape, and this one is about phileo. They're two different. They're two different words here. That's very significant. And I remember my Greek professor saying, scholars are mixed on this, whether there's actually a lot of significance in that. Maybe Jesus was just kind of meeting him where he was by
Yeah.
softening it on the last version of it, rather than some major theological shift that went on. So I know that there's some scholarship debates on the significance of that, but it still is interesting to me. But it felt
Yeah.
more like a Bible study. The answer to your question is it felt more like a Bible study topic and something that you could have a little fun with and talk about in the Bible study, because you sort of go through those shifts to get to the end.
Yeah.
And to get to the end, which was as Jesus came all the way to where Peter was, and he restored Peter for the failures that he had been, and then he put Peter to work.
Yeah.
I don't know if I mentioned this where I mentioned this, but I was probably in the membership class the other day. I was thinking the Isaiah passage as well,
Yeah.
where Peter's own sense of unworthiness was not unlike Isaiah's own sense of unworthiness being before the throne of God. And God is the one who comes to Isaiah, just like Jesus was the one who comes to Peter and says, I got a job for you. First off, you're good. Now I got a job for you. If you're good in that I'm going to restore you, but I have work for you to do.
Yeah.
And then that was in Peter's case, it was to lead my people. Which, by the way, I love that you talked about Peter as the next great leader of the great leader of the early church, and the Acts 2 first preacher of the church and all that. I was waiting. Is Zach going to build that out? Because that seemed like something. Did you want to build out that, like what that was going to be like?
Okay, so this is one of those, we talked about this last week. That's one of those, not in the notes, in the moment, wanting to remind people, because I think we did talk about Peter at the beginning, the early church, like in a recent previous series, right? And so it was still somewhat fresh in my mind, this idea of Peter's vocal leadership being so profoundly necessary. But the difference is now that it's tempered with this incredible humility. That to me, that was what I was really wanting to emphasize. And so I hesitated to build out anything further than that, because then it goes down to a whole nother thing. It goes to a whole other point. And I think that's, we both felt the sense of focus being primary here, which is that sense of God's comfort. As you put it, meets us in the darkness. Jesus brings comfort, and the purpose, and the purpose piece. Because I think when folks are dealing with debilitating anxiety, which sometimes translates into a depression, and a sense of, I can't do this. I'm going to wrap myself in a blanket. It's the image I was using, but they feel like they have no purpose. They're purposeless, right? I mean, and this is where you get the exegetical imagination, thinking through. I mean, I loved how you painted the picture of the cowering in the dark rooms, afraid that they're, and you said the words, they were all afraid, and Peter especially afraid that they were going to be next. Jesus has been crucified. And so the exegetical creativity to say, it wasn't as though Jesus died and everyone was like, yeah, okay, we're good. Okay, let's just go back to, no, they were really afraid. They were really scared and incredibly disappointed, and reeling about, what did the previous 3 years mean? What did the previous 2 days mean? What going back through, what did they miss? What didn't they understand? Which we know is a lot. And of course, Jesus in his post-resurrection meetings with the disciples kind of reteaches them everything he's taught them before, and sets it in the context of, see, now I am alive. But in the moments before, he shows up in the upper room, shows them his hands and his feet. They are really undone, just totally undone. And I loved how you painted that picture, which I didn't paint nearly as much. I think because it emphasizes the fear level, and I think that's a real important point for a lot of folks.
What did you leave out? What did you not say as much of as, or what did you want to do more of, or just leave out altogether?
One thing that I was tempted to go into, because there's two things. One, you did talk about David, which was in our pre-sermon description. I didn't get back. I had it in my notes. I didn't get back to it. I opted to kind of just focus on the Peter side of it, because I had a way to weave it in there because of the way you did it. I thought was, the preparation for being the king, because in that 2 Samuel passage, as he's crowned king, not as he's anointed king, because he's already been anointed earlier, but as he's crowned king, the words are, you will be a shepherd to my people. Now David already had a shepherd background, but even all that he had gone through as in service to Saul just helped emphasize that. I didn't get to any of that. You did, and I thought that was really good. I didn't. The other thing that neither one of us got into, but I was tempted to because it did dovetail nicely with last week, and it is in the John 21 passages right after Peter and Jesus have this exchange. What does Peter say? What does Peter ask? Because this is not a private conversation. This is a public conversation, and the what is indicated in the conversation is that Peter looks over at John and says, "Well, what about him?
What about him?
What about
Yeah.
him?" And I thought, man, if that's not competitive anxiety, and again, you just kind of want to be like, Peter, have you not learned anything, right? I mean, it isn't about, and Jesus just says, it's not about him,
And
it's about
it's like,
you.
and we just had a moment, Peter.
I know, just
Like
come
literally
on.
just had a moment. Remember how you were, the world went black and dark outside, and now, and now this.
Yeah, just celebrate
Right.
that. Just don't worry about him. And so I didn't.
Yeah.
I was tempted to do that because there is something about the continual failure that we sometimes have. We cycle back. We're failures.
Yeah.
That we have depression. God restores us, brings us out of the darkness. We're in the light for a brief second, and then we're right back in the dark. But I decided not to do that. I think that theme will come up a little bit this week as we dig into Paul's issues. But what about you? What else did you leave off the
Well,
script, off the
just
table?
one sort of closing thought on what you were just saying. It reminds me that the time when Jesus says talks about spatially being spatially connected. He said, you are not far from the kingdom of God. And sometimes we are far. By they say, okay, you're close to whatever this whole movement is all about. But other times with life, maybe an hour later, you might be, oh no, you're not close to what it's about. So there's, there are those. That's a very human condition to be
Yeah,
in,
very human.
be weaving in and out of that. Now, one of the things that I didn't do that I wish I would have done, and I wish I would have had more time for, and I think it would have been useful, and I teased it out a little bit more in the live services. Is I started with the Chuck Colson image, and I said that Chuck Colson went from his power hungry self and defining his life based on where he sat relative to the people in the highest power in the world, to starting a prison ministry.
Yeah.
And being known for his testimony of all that he went through. So
I love that.
It was the detail of what his life was like before, and how God used what his life was like before to do something authentic and something real, something purposeful in his life. As I think you mentioned, Celebrate Recovery.
I did,
you mentioned,
yeah.
you mentioned Celebrate Recovery. Yeah, Celebrate Recovery. And that's something that you hear a lot of in Celebrate Recovery. They say, God took my failure and turned it into an opportunity to help others, or as you said, to go help the broken. Mm-hmm. Well, they were the broken, and now the broken are helping the broken. So I would have enjoyed probably taking another 3 or 4 minutes in the sermon to really build out. Okay, maybe it's a failed marriage. What happens if your failure is and it's a spiritual failure first, and then it's a moral failure that follows? What happens if that failure is redeemed, and God redeems you through that failure? How does God turn that from a failure into a purpose? Maybe it's a business failure that you've gone through, and some of it of your own doing. That you've made the worst possible choices, and yet there's redemption. That you would actually be a man or a woman of God, running a business, and how can you turn that failure into a man of God or a woman of God who is leading now in business in a whole different way? And so you turn it from a mess and into a ministry of sorts, and all kinds of friendships. You betrayed a friendship, you betrayed a comment, you let down a friend, you've broken a promise to a friend, or done something, or how about this one? You do this parenting every week, this parenting group every week. Parenting. I mean, how many parents issue to themselves? Had the conversation this weekend. Issue to themselves the Bad Parent of the Year award.
Yeah.
And there's usually a reason why they did, because there was some failure on their part to do so. I can think of things to this day when my daughters were probably middle school that I wish I would have I would have handled that situation way differently than I handled it, because it was just not a gentle and good way of handling the situation. Well, maybe that then can be turned into something useful for the future. That
Yep.
God would use that redemptively. So that I think I would have had a good time spending more time on that.
Yep. Yep. Well, we're going to take another break, and then we get back. We're going to apply this for personal devotion and for group work. So we're going to take a short break, and we'll be back in just a moment. And we're back. Great discussion, Pastor John. And as we close out today's episode, we do want to help folks who are using this for their own personal study and group study. And so if you're talking to folks one-on-one, or you're sitting down, just imagining us sitting in their small group, what are some of the things that would be interesting for people to unpack as they talk about Peter, as they talk about depression, as they talk about their failures? Where would you start?
Well, I would start with first question is how intimate of a group is this?
Yeah.
How honest of a group is this?
Yeah.
Because this is a subject area where, if I'm going to talk about a failure in my life, I got to trust you.
Yeah.
So I probably would start with that is how intimate are we? And you and I have been in groups plenty of time, and the first time someone gets totally honest, they give permission to the rest of the group to be totally honest as well. Because what they're saying with that is, and I guess I'm even just saying this out loud, I'm describing that it would be useful for a group to ask themselves, how honest are we going to get?
Yeah.
So that would be the first thing, because when somebody gets up and starts talking about a fight they had with their spouse, and they're honest about that fight, whatever the subject was, then other people are willing to have honest conversations. So start there, but then I would go to the specific question. Peter, we spent quite a bit of time describing Peter's bottoming out over his own failure, and when have you done that?
Yeah.
When have you failed? Describe a time when you have failed at something, and probably could start it with something general, but I would try to move us to when have you failed spiritually?
Yeah, and I think if you're with a group, and I've led a lot of small groups, and I've been at that stage in the group where there's potential for kind of deeper conversation, but they're kind of on the cusp. And I usually try to start, if I'm trying to get people to that point where they're really talking about their failures, I talk about my own first, and then but even before that, I'll give people the opportunity to talk about something that's a little bit more not as serious a failure, like describe a time when you got a traffic ticket. What was what was that like? Or describe a time where, what was the most embarrassing moment you had in school? And those kinds of failures.
I let the baseball team down by by striking out and with 3 on base.
Or like I remember when I was in 10th grader, I was I was in the cafeteria, and this was a tiny failure, but it was pretty embarrassing. I had I don't know what it is about cafeteria lunches. Like I never drink chocolate milk, but I drank chocolate milk all the time in cafeteria lunches. And I put the tray down. The carton of chocolate milk was on the edge. The weight was uneven, and it spilled like just straight down, right in the middle of the cafeteria. And it was, I had early lunch, which meant I ate lunch at like 10:45. And so I had the whole rest of the day where I was going to have to figure out what to do. And I ended up having to wear gym clothes the whole rest of the day, which, it was kind of embarrassing, and
Yeah.
it was one of those moments where, uh, I look back on it now, and it was kind of funny slash stupid, but it felt pretty big deal back then, right? And so if I'm in a group, I would start with things like that, and then as you get into later in the conversation, move to the idea of, okay, now what are the
And
big failures?
even that though, that's almost a group decision, certainly a group leader decision. Is like,
Yeah,
how far do we take this?
yeah,
Like, you're in a couples group. Is it too far in a couples group to begin talking about your sex life?
yeah,
Well, it's going to be an unusual group that's going to be ready to talk about that. It's probably something you need to. I mean, you guys need to talk about that. But is it? But in the men's group,
yeah,
would men talk about issues that they have with their sex drives? They I've been in a number of them that have been that
yeah,
candid about things, and always framed by what we're seeking the life of Christ,
yeah,
to live the life of Christ. And yet this is a thing that we're talking about. So I think it's an important question to have in a small group, is that how honest is this small group going to be about anything that we're actually struggling with? If we are struggling with finances, if we are struggling with wayward children, if we're struggling with matters of sex or fidelity or anything like that, if we're struggling with pornography, whatever that they are we going to be honest as a group? So I think that would be a
yeah,
really important question, because it's okay to have a boundary.
yeah,
I don't want to suggest that everybody you have to be sharing everything.
no,
Your whole group needs to know every cent of your life. I do think it's important for people to have people in their life who know their sins
hmm,
fully. That's I think that is useful in the kingdom of God to have that. I'm not saying that the group needs to be that. I say group, but I do think the group should decide where our boundaries,
yeah,
explicitly or implicitly decide.
yeah, yeah,
So that all is around the where have you failed question, and then where have you failed spiritually?
yeah,
How
and
many
I
people do you know that have said, I have not led my family well
yeah,
spiritually.
yeah,
I've let the other spouse be the spiritual leader, and I've just been just tagging along for the ride. That's a important, honest spiritual failure,
yeah.
and God can restore that.
And I think even if you're not in a group, um, or even if you are in a group that you plan on doing this in a group, to have that conversation with yourself and with the Lord. A number of people who are journalers and really take some time to
Yes.
to journal that out. Even if you're not ready to talk about it in a group setting,
Yeah.
or with a trusted friend, at least have the conversation with yourself and have the conversation with the Lord. And I would look at if you get into the text, I, I think one of the most interesting questions to hear from people is, what do they think Peter's biggest failure is in the moment of his denial? Is it the actual denial itself? I would encourage people. I did a little bit of this where you compare
Mm.
Matthew's gospel with John's gospel. We did a little bit of this, but go back and look at all the gospels, because it's in all the gospels, and read the full story, and see what is the biggest failure of all. Is it the fact that Peter is so kind of
Intense
braggadocious?
about it.
Yeah, yeah, so intense before, and then so intense the pendulum swings. Is it the actual act of denial? In which case, there are 10 other disciples that are also in that boat. But I would
Is it getting caught?
Is it getting caught? Yeah. I think what do, and I don't know that there's a right or wrong answer, because we're talking about quality of failure, but I would say what part, or maybe the better question is, what part of Peter's failure is most impactful to
Yeah.
individuals in the group? What is it that really, like, whoa, that's the jarring failure? Because I think that speaks to what an individual's kind of failure level is, or their failure threshold is. Because for me, I can say for me, I'm most jarred by Peter's extreme passion, and confidence in his faithfulness to the Lord, and then countered by this extreme, denial of the Lord. Because it would be one thing if he had this extreme passion, vocal passion of faithfulness, and then he just, as soon as the guards showed up, he ran away. That would be a failure. But it just,
Take it to the next step of actually verbalizing his disowning Jesus, and that's that. Yeah, I'm with you. I think that to me is the greatest standout failure for Peter, and out of all the things where Peter has failed. I mean, he sank in the water when he was walking on the water. It was great that he was the one who said, "Let me do it."
Yeah.
But when he did it, it's like, all right, dude.
It didn't last very long.
It didn't work. The waves were more important to you than Jesus in that moment. So yeah. I would say this too. Here's another question to think about for your group, and it really has to do with self-perception, or our own perception of God's perception of us. And there are some people who move through life, and their basic disposition is that God is mad at them.
Mm-hmm.
And so the question is, how do you think God perceives you and the life that you are living?
Mm-hmm.
These are the people, by the way, who say that I couldn't come to church because the walls would fall in because I haven't been to church. The subtext of that is that God is not happy with me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I should not show up in the house of God because God is not happy with me. To what degree is that true for anybody, and for each person? Is God truly unhappy, or is God ready to say, all right, I've forgiven you. Come on, let's get back to life. Let's get back to playing.
Yeah, and I think related to that, I think a really good kind of thought, kind of question internally and with a group is to look at, what do we think Jesus' emotional state is as he's talking to Peter? Like, how does Jesus perceive Peter in this moment?
Wow.
Because Peter is grieved that Jesus asks him the third time, right? So, but what does Peter think Jesus thinks of him because of that, right? Like, just like what you said, what is Peter's perception of Jesus' perception of Peter?
Yeah.
But then actually get into, if we're in Jesus' shoes, what do we think Jesus, what Jesus is feeling towards Peter, based on his approach, and if it was us and somebody else who had failed us, how would we respond? If we were actually in Jesus' shoes right now and somebody fails us, how would we respond? I think those kind of help unpack the personal question that you're posing is, what is Jesus' perception of me? How do I think Jesus sees me? Well,
let me throw out a couple of hints here for when the answer time comes around. If you're the leader listening and getting ready, that Peter jumps out of the boat to swim to Jesus. So let that sort of govern how you perceive what Peter was thinking, and then the fact that Jesus, and I said a little bit more about this in the live services, that it was such an intentional act to restore Peter, done in a very deliberate way. What does that tell you about how Jesus is perceiving the moment, and as well?
Yeah.
I'll throw one more.
Yeah. Go ahead.
And I was talking about it a little while ago. How can God take whatever failure that you have had in your life? What does that? What would the inverse of that failure look like if you were to think of it as a way that God would use that for some greater good? What would that look like? Chuck Colson went to prison, right hand of the President of the United States, in prison fellowship, started a whole ministry, launched a whole worldwide ministry going on to this day. What does that look like for you?
Yep.
With your own failure.
Yeah, I think that is the way to kind of, if you're in a group, that's the way to close it out, is to imagine a future where the failure does define your purpose, right? We sometimes say, well, your failure doesn't define you. Your failure doesn't define you. Well, maybe it does define your purpose. It maybe in a great way. I mean, the cross of Jesus defined the work of Jesus. Because without the cross, there's no empty tomb, right? Without the cross, without the crucifixion, there's no resurrection. And I was actually talking to someone yesterday who came in struggling because they think there's a divorce on the horizon, and I said, do what you can, talk about all the different things, towards reconciliation. But I said, if the other person is really dug in and the divorce papers come across your table and you have to sign them, maybe ask God to prepare your heart and mind for the purpose that comes out of it. And they just had never thought. It's because if statistics are to be believed and 51% of marriages end in divorce, then there are other people who need the hope of Jesus Christ in the middle of their divorce. And if you've got that answer and you walk through that valley of divorce, it's like you said, failure of divorce is not the enemy.
Yeah.
Letting that failure defeat you is bad, but God's
but you do learn through it, you grow through it, and there are redemptive acts coming out of it.
Yep.
And that you can be a help to others. Yeah.
And so what, and maybe a person in your group who's talking is like, I'm in the middle of it. I'm in the middle of the failure. I'm in the middle of the divorce proceeding. I'm in the middle of struggling with my kids and not knowing what the answer is. I'm in the middle of the financial. I'm not past the point of being a financial failure. I'm in the middle of failing right now. I can't, and I don't know, so, but.
My prayer at the moment is I don't want a ministry out of this failure.
That's right.
I want the failure to not be a failure.
That's right. And that's okay to pray that, right? That's okay to pray that. It's okay to pray that it doesn't actually come to fruition. I think it's good to pray that. But if it does, that doesn't mean that the failure has to be the final word. The failure can be the definition of your future purpose. And so what could that look like? To your point, it's almost like you're time traveling. It's like you're getting in the DeLorean and you're going to the future, and you're seeing what could it be if we really leaned into the restoration of Jesus on the beach. What could it look like? I mean, for Peter, we know what it looked like. I mean, he went and did incredible things for the cross and for the gospel and for the kingdom, but he wasn't perfect even after that. Same thing with David. It wasn't perfect even after that. But it was purpose, right? And I think that's an important point.
One guy called that play the movie forward. I'm trying to see if I see the book of nine things you must do. Henry Cloud. He said one of the things you must do is you learn how to play the movie forward. Imagine what this thing looks like played out. That'd be tremendously helpful.
Great image. Great image. Well, next week we are going to be in week number 5. We're going to be talking about the Apostle Paul and his thorn in the flesh. So that'll be a fun one. Pastor John in Classic, I'm in Vine once again. And wherever you're at, if you have missed this week's messages in our series, we encourage you to go to our website, fpclakeland.org, or you can now download the Church Center app and find complete services on the Church Center app on our website by clicking on the worship page on the website or the sermon page on the Church Center app. Watch complete services, both classic and the modern worship service. And wherever you're experiencing this podcast, we encourage you to hit the subscribe button, share it with your friends, give us a like, turn on the notification bell icon wherever it's at, so you can be notified when a new episode drops. God willing, this will also be a video. So if you're watching this on YouTube, subscribe to our YouTube page, youtube.com/FPC Lakeland. Not just Armchair preaching, but all the weekly services go up there.
And you never know.
Announcements, Bible studies, lots of things. So hit the subscribe, hit the bell
You
icon.
you may love this format. We may do this every week.
Oh, this particular format like this?
Yeah.
This might be way easier than the other way. I don't know. We'll find out. We'll find out. Well, John, thanks for trudging through the technological issues and for sitting.
Yeah, thanks for leading that, and have a great time with Caleb. What a great experience, father son, getaway. That's great.
One of the ways that we try to find that balance that we were talking about earlier is to make these sorts of things a priority. So I appreciate it. Well, I'll see you tomorrow, and for everyone else,
all right, safe travels.
We will see everyone else next time.